This is Mason Winfield of Spirit Way Project, welcoming our guest, Belinda Gore, to our program on the Great Circle Alliance. And our focus today is the Hopewell cultures, the ancient monuments of Ohio. And we've got a true expert on tonight, and I'm looking forward to learning some stuff. Now, this program is not about me. It's about our guest and what our guest knows. And I want to hear that. But I'm going to start with an anecdote. I mean, a lot of us know that the ancient monuments were built with sacred intent, sacred architecture, geometry, alignment. They were built for everyone to enhance their spirituality. And I happened to be in the state of Ohio about a month ago. I mean, this is November 10th, actually about 6 weeks ago. And I swung through the ancient monuments at Newark, Ohio, which are remarkable. And there is a prominent archaeologist, anthropologist that works with them that I was hoping to get for a guest on our show. And I showed up, and lo and behold, it's like 4 PM. He's out leading a tour. There's a couple guys watching, and they're obviously suits. And I came up to the suits and said, "Hey, I'd like to get that guy in my program." They go, "You know who he is?" I go, "Yeah, I kind of like know who he is." And what's his email? And they go, "Well, what's the program about?" I go, "Sacred, supernatural, spiritual, paranormal, They go, "Well, if it's going to be anything spooky, we can't let him go on." I go, "I didn't invite you guys. What's his email?" But I'm a gentleman. I went through the channels, and they're not going to let the guy on. And when I was chatting with them, I tried to explain to them, look, the calendar of the year has sacred time. You know when it's Christmas. All you do is stay where you are, and it comes around, You know when it's Halloween. You know when it's May Eve. Sacred time. But you guys are in charge of sacred space. People can come here where the ancestors were, and they can know they're in temple space. And I congratulated them on their work of preservation. It was like I was from Mars, just went right by. So we got somebody here who I think is going to help us out a little more than that. Good evening, Belinda.
Hello. Interesting story. Yes.
Well, but you're telling the stories from now on tonight. But tell us just a little bit about yourself. Where you're from? What's your job? What's your training?
Well, I'm from Ohio, which is where I live now. I live in Columbus, about 45 minutes from Newark. I grew up near Dayton. I was educated in Ohio schools, went to the Ohio State University, and I'd never been to the Newark Earthworks until about 5 years ago. And I'm not very proud of that, but that is a lot of what motivates me in the work that we're doing with the Great Circle Alliance. My training is in psychology. I'm a psychologist. Now I do coaching. I teach coaches. I do other kinds of things as well. I'm not an archaeologist. I've not previously been very interested in history. However, in my own background, I've worked for about 40 years with the research of anthropologist Felicitas Goodman, who interestingly taught at Denison University.
I graduated from Denison.
Did you really? Wow.
Yes, ma'am. Classics English.
Well, she was an anthropologist. And let's see, she was teaching in the 70s at Denison. And in her research, she was curious about, she'd been investigating speaking in tongues and was curious about the experience of non-ordinary states of consciousness and how those get set up. So that's part of my background. My attunement with indigenous cultures comes because of my research and practice and teaching in that arena. But I'm not trained as an archaeologist. However, when I realized that these world-class sites, ceremonial earthworks, were in my backyard, or I was in their backyard, more accurately, and I didn't know anything about them, it concerned me. And then, as my friend who helped start the nonprofit, the Great Circle Alliance, is from New Zealand, worked a lot with Maori in uh, in art and heritage museums and exhibitions and ceremonials. And he said, "Where are all the indigenous people?" And I thought, well, there are not a lot of indigenous people in Ohio. In fact, today, about 0.2% of the population in Ohio identify as indigenous. And so this is a land where 2,000 years ago, the indigenous people at that time built monumental precincts that were considered the spiritual center of North America in the Hopewell culture at that time. Those people moved, we lost track of them, and then other tribal people moved into this area. But they were removed in the mid 1800s and marched basically to Oklahoma. So here are these wonderful, amazing places with few indigenous interpreters to help us learn about what the sites are all about. Now, you probably were interested in having Brad Lepper be on your program. He's done a lot of research around the Hopewell ceremonial earthworks, is very knowledgeable, and is a good speaker. So,
No, he's a good guy, no doubt.
yes, he is. Yeah.
Wish they'd let him on the program.
Well, be that as it may, there are more of us now who are wanting to amplify the indigenous voices from this area from 2,000 years ago, from 200 years ago, and today. And that's really what the Great Circle Alliance is about.
That's a beautiful thing. I wanted to ask you, help me figure out who the Hopewell were. Now, my understanding is that the monument building societies, they started with the Adena, they became the Hopewell, and the final group is classified Mississippi, and it's like they start the earlier in the alphabet, the earlier in time. And the Adena were not monumental. They built stuff, but they left marks. The Hopewell were monumental, right?
So let's back up. Mound building has been going on for a longer period of time than that. And actually, people built mounds as ceremonial sites around the world. But there's a place in northeastern Louisiana called Poverty Point, which is also a World Heritage Site, which is about 5,000 years old, I think.
I thought it was only 4. Way to go.
No. It's very interesting. I've never been there. It's apparently in the middle of so-called nowhere. But there are drawings of the Poverty Point sites. Then the Adena people you mentioned made mounds that were conical shape burial mounds. They were just for burial. Now, we have to get clear about the names. The Adena people didn't call themselves Adena, and the Hopewell era culture didn't call themselves that. Adena is the name of Thomas Worthington's estate near Chillicothe. Thomas Worthington was the first governor of Ohio, and it was on his property, Adena, where the artifacts of the first Adena mounds were excavated. So the Adena culture is named after Thomas Worthington's house. The Hopewell era culture is not the people, it wasn't a Hopewell tribe. Hopewell was the last name of Mordecai Hopewell, who owned the property where the first mounds were explored and artifacts excavated. So you're right. Adena, the conical burial mounds, which are not just in Chillicothe. There's a very well-known one in Marietta, Ohio, right at the convergence of the Ohio and the Muskingum, right? And it's in the middle of this amazing cemetery, so it's a burial mound from that long ago with Revolutionary soldiers and Civil War soldiers and local people. So Adena, and then Hopewell came along around 2,000 years ago. And the culture, the difference in the mound building is that the structures were enclosed sites. So as you saw you were probably at the Great Circle at the Newark Earthworks, which was at one end of a 4 square mile ceremonial precinct. And the mounds are mounded dirt with gravel and clay and interestingly engineered mounds of dirt that in that case define a circle. There are also avenues of mounds. And then on the other side of the Newark Earthworks is the octagon with the observatory circle. Did you get over there? That's where currently there's a golf course.
Right.
That's on that prehistoric ceremonial site.
That is a little disappointing, but at least
that's in process. Change is in process. It will take a little while, but I don't want to go into all of that.
I'm
but
bad. Yeah, I don't either.
Yeah.
Hey, I wanted to ask you this. I've been curious. Well, it was interesting what you told me about the builders of the monuments were not the indigenous people that the white guys found when they arrived.
Right.
Okay,
right.
Well, that's cool because the people who built, everybody associates the megaliths of the British Isles with the Celts. They didn't build them. They were the newcomers. Someone before them built them. I've been informed that Hopewell DNA, that the precise people whose ancestors built those monuments, for instance, at Newark, I've heard there's a little bit of mystery about them and where they went. Is that correct?
Well, I think mystery is a little too dramatic.
I love drama,
It's just as our friend John Lau is the director of the Newark Earthworks Center, which is part of the Ohio State University, the Newark branch. And he said, yeah, it's true. We don't know about the year 600. For a while, there were no mounds being built, but there were still people living in the area. And then it seemed that they weren't so much. But that was like, let's say 1400 years ago. Do you know what your ancestors were doing 1400 years ago?
Oh,
I
trying.
don't.
Well, yeah, I do. They were trying to buck the damn Normans, and they were starting to learn Middle English, and
Mm.
yeah, at least the
But
ones in
it,
it.
right, it's not like it's that culture sort of died down. Some people have suggested it was because of there were climate change issues and people moved from the Ohio River Valley further west to the Mississippi River Valley. And then, as you said earlier, a new culture developed known as the Mississippian culture, now the Southeastern Cultural Complex. Very different cultural characteristics as compared with the Hopewell. So John Lau, who's Potawatomi, suggests that we call them the Hopewell era peoples, plural, because they lived in small groups mostly. Maybe a couple of families, 20 people living together. But they came together on these sites to build these monumental earthworks. At the Newark earthworks, it's estimated that there were, if that they built them filling baskets of about a cubic foot of dirt using shovels made of probably shell that was with sinew attached to some kind of stick. That a cubic foot of dirt, they estimate that it took about 7 million cubic feet of dirt to build the Newark earthworks. And so if you put a cubic foot side by side, I don't know where you live. If from Columbus, Ohio, 7 million cubic feet takes me out beyond Denver. It's a long way. It's a lot of dirt. And
Yeah.
so we're talking about organizing, well, engineering, geometry, managing people, being able to feed people while they were working. And it's strongly believed that these were um, pretty peaceable people, and probably people came on pilgrimage to help with the building. It was not forced labor, which makes the site even more appealing to me.
Wow. Um, so do we have a clue where the descendants of the I heard a rumor that the Hopewell DNA was found among a Great Lakes nation called the Kickapoo. Have you heard anything about where the Hopewell people went, or do you think they just quit building mounds but still living and then were supplanted by other native groups?
Or stop building mounds for reasons we don't know, maybe moved further west. The Fort Ancient culture came in. They were probably more effigy building people. So, like the Serpent Mound,
Serpent
which
Mound,
is an
yeah,
effigy mound, was later than the Hopewell era mounds. I
sure.
don't know about the connection with the Kickapoo.
Okay. For our listeners, an effigy mound is an earthwork that looks like an animal, a living being, animal or
Right.
person. Hey, Linda, while I've got you, do you know anything about that mound, the alligator mound, which is about 1 mile from the hill Denison is on in Grand?
Sure. Yes. It is an effigy mound. It's
Water
not been
panther?
well cared for. What? I'm sorry.
Do you think it might be the water panther? Is that what most people think it may
Well,
be?
yes, because it's named alligator, but the tail is long and in a spiral, which I've not seen an alligator like that, and its arms and legs are extended. Um, but think about it. If you were translating And the interpreter said, "Well, what is this?" And it's a giant creature that comes out of the waters, and
Yeah.
it's dangerous and it can eat men.
Bite you.
Well,
And
yeah.
it was dynamite.
So
Yeah.
the closest the experience was an alligator, but as you mentioned, the underwater panther in the religious spiritual understanding of the three realms which make up reality, which is the middle world we live in, the beneath world of the waters, the chaos out of which we emerged, which is really brilliant. I mean, individually, we emerge out of the placental waters, but as life on planet Earth, life began in the oceans and was catalyzed by lightning striking the water. So the water is the source of creation. Then here's the middle world, and then the celestial worlds above, which are orderly, and so most of the earthworks are aligned to celestial bodies, the sun, the moon, and the constellations. So the underwater panther is a well known spirit figure that protects the waters. And it is suspected that the alligator mound is an effigy of the underwater panther.
Um, I'm not an expert on this subject. I really appreciate your insights here. I noticed that with the First Nations cultures of my region, Lakes Erie and Ontario, they've got a kind of an opposition between a watery being, which they regard as serpentine, and an aerial being, like maybe even a god, the thunderer. And I believe as you go a bit west and you get into the more of the Great Lakes, Ohio Valley, Mississippian, you've still got a similar opposition, but it might be the
Yes,
thunderbird. Am I correct? It's the thunderbird,
yes.
and the underwater panther is their version of the. Okay, boy, that's cool stuff. It's thanks for clearing that up for me. It's beautiful stuff. Geez, I got so many questions I wanted to ask you. I've been making a little note here. Well, first of all, the Hopewell Highway, that 60-mile long pathway between an octagonal monument connected to a circular one in Newark, which appears to point right at another one very similar to it in Chillicothe.
Right.
What?
Well, appears to point right to it. Here's what's amazing. First, the octagon and the so-called observatory circle that are connected as part of the Newark earthworks are built in alignment with the lunar cycle. And if you stand at one point at the observatory circle, you look down the little avenue that connects them on the far point of the octagon every 18.6 years, the moon rises at that point. Now, that's some pretty precise understanding. One, to plot it every 18.6 years, but two, to build a massive earthwork so that you've got it exactly right and the moon rises where it's supposed to. That in itself is pretty miraculous.
Oh,
Miraculous isn't the right word, sophisticated. However, the only other combination of octagon and circle combined in the Hopewell ceremonial earthworks is in Hopeton. And if you draw a line from that circle through that octagon, those two lines connect at a 90-degree angle 60 miles apart. That's very precise.
yeah. Let me slow down here. I believed, or I thought, that was octagon connected to a circle in Chillicothe. Maybe.
That's the one
Oh,
I'm
that's the one
speaking
you're
of.
talking about. I thought so there's two of these, and one's at Newark and one's at Chillicothe.
Near Chillicothe, yes.
Hope that. And I thought it was a straight line. There was a pathway, even the Hopewell Highway.
Well, no, the Hopewell Highway is something different.
Oh,
Coming south from the area of the octagon and the circle are parallel mounds creating a road or an avenue. Brad Lepper believes that most likely that was a road that connected the Newark earthworks with Chillicothe. There are a lot of mounds in Chillicothe. It's not the same 4 square mile area that is one large ceremonial area. There are a variety of mounds in the Chillicothe area, but it's suggested that more of the population actually lived in the Chillicothe area and came to the Newark area regularly for ceremony, that a lot of people gathered. People
huh.
gathered from all over the continent. There's obsidian from Colorado, copper from the Great Lakes, shells from the Gulf of Mexico, and so forth.
I attended a conference. I don't remember when it was. It might have been 10 years ago, a Hopewell conference, and I think it was in Chillicothe. Were you there?
Mm-hmm. No, I wasn't, but I've read the uh, book of the presentations that were made then.
Absolutely fabulous. I mean, just
Yes.
wonderful scholars. And I remember one talk I went to where the guy demonstrated the Hopewell Trading Network. He had a map of the continental states, and he had Hopewell products to and from, like, the Northwest, the Northeast, the Great Lakes, the Southeast, the Southwest. And then he started talking about DNA, and he talked about places where Hopewell DNA has been found, and they were the same. It's like
Oh, interesting.
the trading network was getting a little whoopee on the side, the story about the traveling salesman, whatever. So, boy, that's cool stuff. Hey, I wanted to ask you this. Have you ever, I hear there are a few vestiges visible of the Hopewell Highway near Newark. Have you ever seen anything?
Yes.
You have.
It's all it is just, it's like two parallel mounds. It's not surfaced. But around the same time, the Maya in Mexico were building the limestone suck bays, or the limestone covered roads that were connecting major living areas. So it's not surprising that there would be a road, that there would be a ceremonial road for pilgrimage that is different from a trade route. There were, well, around Newark, most of the transportation was probably by water, that many ceremonial sites, the location was important, so people could easily get there by water. But there are trails. There was a trail, settlers in the 1700s talked about an indigenous trail that connected Lake Erie to probably the Ohio River. So there were trails, but that's different from the roads that connected the mound sites or the earthwork sites.
So, Belinda, we were talking about these pathways, potential pathways, connectors between sites in Ohio. We were talking about the Sakbeab, the connectors between the Mayan cities. These are ley lines.
Could be.
Well, I mean, maybe not exactly, but I mean, that's pretty much the bottom line definition of a ley, as in Europe.
Well,
Go ahead.
yeah. And if if we don't rely on a European vocabulary, what we're really talking about is that the indigenous people on this continent understood the land to be a living being. And that at, I mentioned our friend John Lau, when he took his Potawatomi elders to the Great Circle, they said, this land is sacred, not because they built this earthwork here. The land was already sacred. This was a sacred place. And one definition of sacred in this context is that the boundaries or the veils between the worlds are thinner there, that it's easier to have connection with the invisible world at sacred places. The roads seem to fascinate you, and maybe it's because you are interested in ley lines. I think when I've heard Brad talk about the Hopewell Road, he's just wanting to underscore that the people who lived in the Ohio River Valley were connected. They weren't just little groups of people. They were connected, and they came together to create amazing ceremonial earthworks and to return to those earthworks for ceremony every year.
Well, a straight line connector between sacred sites is found worldwide, whatever anyone wants to call it. And I personally am thrilled to be able to point out to people of any orientation that, hey, this stuff was going on. It's a pan-human. It's not just the white guys, it's not just the red, it's everybody.
So the notion of ley lines is really to speak to that the earth is alive as a planet, that the land is a being, and that there are areas where the energy is different than at other places. And that's been recognized in a variety of ways. I don't know anything about finding out about ley lines on this continent.
Well, I don't know if anybody really knows anything about them. I mean, there are some people who say that lays don't exist. I mean, eventually we'll chat about that on this program with someone who specializes.
Who knows something that I certainly don't.
You're doing pretty well. But some people get really kind of spacey about the ley lines, and they think their own psychic abilities will walk around. There's one over there, and oh man, feel the vibe. And that's never been demonstrable. But I don't want to dwell on this too long. I think we got lots of places to go here quickly. But I did find myself fascinated to suspect that this kind of a impulse for sacred alignment, not only with astronomical features, but also with other man-made structures. I found that interesting. Hey, what do you know about geological anomalies? I mean, have you ever heard of any like gas wells or fountains or caves or unusual energy or anything like that about the any of the Hopewell sites?
No.
Okay. Well, maybe they're not there. Maybe they're, what sort of experiences do you hear people talk about when they're at, for instance, the Hopewell earthworks? What do they say they hear or see or feel?
Well, mostly that there is a discernible peacefulness in the interior of the Great Circle, even though just beyond it is Route 79 and
Yeah.
traffic and so forth, that it's enjoyable, it's peaceful. People stand on the Eagle Mound, which may or may not be an eagle effigy at the center of the Great Circle.
And maybe you're not supposed to stand on it either.
Well, it was a lot of the Hopewell culture was oriented toward mortuary rituals. That is, when you died, there were things that needed to be done to help you. And it may not be just everybody had this happen, but people who were prepared, who had lived their lives in a way that they were prepared to undertake the path of souls, that the bodies, the physical bodies, were dealt with in a certain way so that the soul that was connected to the body itself, that holds the integrity of the physical self together, that was dissembled so that the free soul, the eternal soul, if you will, could take a path up the constellation, basically according to the constellation of Cygnus, past the eagle, past the dragon, and on beyond the Milky Way, which is where the ancestors live. Now, we don't have any written records from the Hopewell era people, but this construct of the importance of what happens when we die has been recorded among Indigenous peoples in this Eastern Woodlands area. A lot of different tribes speak of similar kinds of things. And so there was a location at the center of the Great Circle where probably the shamans, the religious specialists, as my anthropologist friend said, dealt with the physical bodies. Eventually, that structure was burned in order to return it to the earth, and soil was put over where that was burned, and that probably is what makes the shape that's been called the Eagle Mound. But I mean, it's lovely too, because if the soul is making its journey on the path of souls, riding on the back of an eagle or toward the eagle, who might be the adversary that must be dealt with, it's really all about preparing ourselves for the world of spirit and how to retain our consciousness so that we can become part of the world of the ancestors who have retained their consciousness and watch over us and guide us, those who are living in the material world now.
Wow. Well, that's pretty poetic. Hey, do you think there is good evidence of a Mesoamerican influence moving up the Mississippi? Do you think Hopewellian culture might have been indigenous to its own region, or they could have been influenced by influences from the Valley of Mexico?
Well, that area around the coast where Olmec lived on the Gulf of Mexico, it's not that far to the mouth of the Mississippi River. And of course, that takes us into a different cultural influence. The Spanish explorers who came through Mesoamerica and up the Mississippi, there's some influence in Cahokia because that's a truncated mound.
I'm sorry, I have a friend coming over. I'm sure Max will cut this. Actually, our show is probably not too much longer. I'm sorry, Amber. We had some technical difficulties, and we ran over. I'm sure we'll be edited. You're very understanding. Max, you there? Wait a minute. He'll edit this. Don't worry about it. Edit this. So neither one of us will be broadcasting any aspect of our social life to the universe, you know. Hey, what's going on over there? Booby trap the place. Hey, there's a bottle open. I think there's a. Oh, wait, just grab yourself a glass. There's a bottle open right here. I'll get my life together in about 5 minutes. Busy day. Belinda, should I be calling you professor or doctor or no?
I have a PhD. I am a PhD doctor, but I don't use that.
I know. I'm an MA and I don't have people call me master, you know. So I did want to end this by asking you, have you ever had an experience while in presence of the monuments? That is probably I have. But I really feel like when I step into a zone of these, you know, the American architect Louis Sullivan, he was the guy Frank Lloyd Wright always referred to as the master. Now, Louis Sullivan, his dad was an Irish step dancer, and Louis Sullivan built that magnificent bank in Newark. And they say that when Sullivan was in Newark working on that bank, that every day he would leave work and he'd wander down to the monuments and just walk around and just space. It's like for Louis Sullivan, the Newark monuments were like glyphs. They were geoglyphs of a mysterious society.
Sacred site. They're sacred sites. The boundary between the visible and the invisible world is thin.
Have you ever had any experience among those monuments, any of them that you considered transcendent?
I've had a number of experiences, and I'm not inclined to tell stories about it, but I'm quite clear that they're sacred sites from my own experience as well as other people.
Well, maybe someday, Professor, you will feel that need to tell us a few of the transformations that might have come over you at those sites. For now, this is Mason Winfield of Spirit Way Project with deep gratitude to our guest tonight, Belinda Gore, PhD, and she's been very helpful with, answered all my questions. You are a true scholar, Professor. And she was also a very kind and tolerant person, because we've had some tech glitches tonight to put this program together, and nobody yelled at me. So with that,
amazing, isn't it? Yes.
I'm not used to this kind of tolerance, you know. So at any rate, to all of our listeners, thank you so much for joining us tonight. This is Spirit Way Project. We're all pulling together, try to work toward a better world. And here's to it. Thank you, Professor. Until next time.
Thanks, Mason.
Cheers, y'all.
Bye.